My husband laughed when he saw the empty chair beside me. He leaned toward my sister, whispering as if I were just a joke before their lunch reservation. His lawyer called me a nobody, but I didn't flinch. I just stood up and slid a heavy yellow envelope toward the judge. "Before you decide," I said, "you need to see why they are sitting there." The judge flipped the page, and his cold laugh made my husband's smile vanish. "My name is Samantha Reed, and I was sitting on the wrong side of the courtroom. The air inside the Harrogate County Court was cold and smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. I sat alone at the defendant's table on the left, my hands clasped tight enough to turn my knuckles white. I was representing myself, pro se, exactly as they had hoped I would. To the court, I looked like a woman who could not afford a fight. To my husband, I looked like a loose end he was about to cut off. Across the aisle, Dr. Nolan Pierce sat like a king holding court. He looked immaculate in a navy suit that cost more than I used to make in 3 months at the warehouse. Next to him sat his girlfriend, who also happened to be my younger sister, Brianna. She was wearing a cream blazer my mother had bought her, sitting tall with a look of feigned solemnity. Behind them, my parents, Glenn and Marlene, sat shoulder to shoulder. They were not there to support their eldest daughter. They were there to celebrate the winner. Nolan's lawyer stood up, smoothing his tie. He was a man who was paid $400 an hour to destroy people like me. He gestured toward me with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Your Honor, let us be realistic here," the lawyer said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ms. Reed works in a warehouse. She has no higher education. She made absolutely no financial contribution to my client's medical degree or his current practice. She is a lovely woman, I am sure, but she has been a passenger in this marriage. Asking for spousal support is, frankly, insulting." I stared at the wood grain of the table. I felt the heat rising in my neck, but I did not look away. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked over her spectacles at me. "Ms. Reed," she asked, her voice flat, "do you have a response or an opening statement?" That was when I heard it. A soft, short chuckle. I looked up. Nolan was covering his mouth with his hand, but his eyes were crinkled in amusement. He was laughing. He thought this was the final act of his victory lap, a little comedic interlude before he went to lunch. Beside him, Brianna pressed her lips together, giving me a pitying look that screamed, "You lost." I did not argue. I did not scream. I simply stood up. I pushed my chair back. The metal legs scraped against the linoleum floor with a screech that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. The noise made my mother flinch. I reached into my worn canvas tote bag, the one with the frayed strap that Nolan hated, and pulled out a thick, yellow manila envelope. It was heavy in my hand. I walked to the bench, my heels clicking a slow, steady rhythm on the floor. I placed the envelope directly in front of the judge. "Before you make a final ruling." "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I ask that you look at this, because this is the reason they are sitting there, and why I am standing here." Nolan's lawyer shot out of his seat. "Objection!" He barked. "We have not been provided with this evidence during discovery. This is an ambush. Counsel cannot just hand over documents that we have never seen." I turned my head slightly, locking eyes with the lawyer, then shifted my gaze to Nolan. "He has seen it," I said calmly. "He just thought I was too stupid to keep it." The courtroom went silent. The judge looked at me, then at the envelope. She reached out and undid the metal clasp. The sound of the paper tearing open seemed to echo in the silence. She pulled out the top document. I watched her eyes. They scanned the header, then the date, then the signature at the bottom. Her eyebrows shot up. Her expression shifted from boredom to sharp, predatory interest. And then she did something that terrified the room. She laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like a knife hitting a plate. She looked up at Nolan's lawyer, then shifted her gaze to Nolan. I turned to look at my husband one last time. He was not laughing anymore. His smile had frozen on his face, twitching slightly at the corners. The color was draining from his skin, leaving him gray and ashen. It looked like someone had just reached inside him and turned off the lights. 7 years ago, the air in the 24-hour laundromat smelled of cheap detergent and desperation. That was where I met him. It was 2 in the morning, and Nolan was standing over a folding table, frantically scrubbing at a dark coffee stain on a white dress shirt. He looked like a man on the edge of a breakdown. I walked over, pulled a stain stick from my basket, and worked the fabric until the brown spot vanished. He looked up at me, his blue eyes wide and shining under the flickering fluorescent lights. "You just saved my life," he had whispered, his voice thick with relief. "I have my med school interview in 6 hours, and you are my miracle." I was not used to being anyone's miracle. In the Reed household, my sister Brianna was the miracle. She was the sun, bright and burning and demanding of all attention. I was just the gravity that kept everyone's feet on the floor. I was the one who fixed the printer, the one who drove Mom to her appointments, the one who paid for the pizza when Dad forgot his wallet. I was useful, but Nolan looked at me like I was precious. That was the hook, and I swallowed it whole. Nolan had a dream. He spoke about orthopedic surgery the way religious men speak about scripture. He mapped out our future on napkins and the backs of envelopes. It was a beautiful picture, but it was expensive. You focus on the books. I told him one night, sitting on the floor of his studio apartment while he panicked over tuition costs. "You study, and I will worry about the rent. I will handle the money." I did not just handle it. I became a machine for it. I quit my steady 9-to-5 office job because the salary was fixed. Instead, I took a shift at the distribution warehouse that started at 4 in the morning. My body became a map of aches and bruises. I lifted boxes until my arms shook. Then I drove straight to a grocery store to work the midday rush as a cashier. On weekends, I cleaned office buildings downtown, scrubbing toilets used by people who made more in an hour than I made in a week. I ceased to be a person. I became a living, breathing alarm clock. When Nolan got his acceptance letter, my parents insisted on a celebratory dinner. But the toast was not for the team we had become. It was entirely for him. My father, Glenn, clapped Nolan on the shoulder, beaming. Then he turned to me, his smile fading just a fraction. "Well, at least you are finally being useful for something. Samantha, investing in a doctor is smart." My mother, Marlene, chimed in between bites of roast chicken. "Just make sure you keep the lights on. Sam, don't waste this opportunity. Do not let him fail just because you cannot pay the electric bill." I looked down at my plate, my hands hidden in my lap because my cuticles were raw from the warehouse cardboard. Across the table, Brianna was leaning forward, her chin resting on her hand, staring at Nolan with a hunger I chose to ignore. "A doctor in the family," Brianna purred, batting her eyelashes. "That sounds so prestigious. Maybe I should get sick more often." "Nolan, would you take care of me?" She laughed, a bright, tinkling sound that usually charmed everyone. Nolan laughed with her, his face flushed with the attention. I told myself it was just Brianna being Brianna. She always wanted what shone the brightest. I did not realize then that she was not joking. Later that night, outside my parents' house, Nolan took my rough, calloused hands in his smooth ones. He kissed my knuckles, right over a fresh paper cut. "I am going to pay you back for all of this," he swore, his voice dropping to that serious, intimate register that made my knees weak. "I will give you the world. Sam, you are the only one who matters. I promise." It was a cheap promise, but I paid for it with my youth. That night, I started a new habit. I took an old shoebox and started saving receipts. Every gas station fill-up, every textbook purchase, every rent check, every utility bill. I did not do it because I suspected him. I did it because poverty makes you terrified of making a mistake. I needed to know where every single cent went. I did not know that I was building an arsenal. I just thought I was being a good wife. I closed my eyes that night and told myself the lie that would keep me going for 7 years. I told myself that it was only temporary. I told myself that once he walked across that stage, everything would change, and I was right. Everything did change, just not the way I thought it would. The year Nolan began his residency, the atmosphere in my life shifted. It was not a sudden break, but a slow, suffocating change, like a room running out of oxygen. Suddenly, my family's home transformed into a shrine for Dr. Nolan Pierce. Whenever we visited for Sunday dinner, my parents rolled out an invisible red carpet for him. He was ushered to the head of the table, offered the best cut of roast, and listened to with rapt attention. Meanwhile, I was quietly pushed into the kitchen. I became the unseen staff, refilling water glasses and clearing plates while my husband and my family laughed in the other room. Then Brianna started coming over to our cramped apartment more often. She claimed she needed a quiet place to rehearse lines for her acting classes or to study for some vague online course she had started. But when I dragged myself through the front door at midnight, smelling of cardboard dust and floor cleaner, the apartment would be empty. Nolan would be asleep, but in the kitchen sink, I would find 2 wine glasses. They were always rinsed, but never quite dried. 1 glass I could understand, but 2. When I tried to ask Nolan about the budget one evening over a dinner of pasta I had bought with coupons, he slammed his fork down. "Samantha, please." He sighed, looking at me with pure exhaustion. "Do not talk about money while I am eating. It gives me indigestion. Can we just enjoy a meal without you counting every penny?" I looked at the food on his fork. Every ingredient, from the sauce to the salt, had been paid for by the ache in my lower back. But I swallowed my words and apologized. The criticisms became personal. My mother would take my hands in hers, not to comfort me, but to inspect the damage. She would frown at my cracked cuticles and the calluses on my palms. "You really need to do something about this, Sam," she said one afternoon. Her voice lowered as if discussing a disease. "A man like Nolan. He is going to be in high society soon. He needs a wife who knows how to present herself. You look like help." The first deep cut happened at a hospital mixer. I had rushed there straight from my warehouse shift, changing in the car. When I walked in, I saw Nolan standing with a senior attending physician. Brianna was there too, laughing at something the older doctor said, her hand resting lightly on Nolan's arm. This must be the charming wife you mentioned," the attending said, beaming at Brianna. I stepped forward, ready to introduce myself. But Nolan did not correct him. He just smiled a tight, uncomfortable smile and said, "We are all just family here." He let the man believe my sister was his wife, while I stood 3 feet away, holding a warm glass of punch, invisible. That was when the money started moving. I noticed small withdrawals at first, then larger purchases for medical supplies that never appeared in our apartment. When I confronted Nolan, showing him the bank app, he laughed. It was a cold, incredulous sound. "Are you accusing me of hiding money?" he asked, shaking his head. "From who, you, Sam? Look at you. Who would even bother trying to rob you?" He gestured at my faded, oversized t-shirt and messy bun, reducing my entire existence to a joke. The breaking point came at his graduation celebration. My parents had rented a private room at a nice restaurant, but somehow I ended up sitting alone on the balcony, nursing a drink, while the party roared inside. Through the glass doors, I watched. Brianna was wearing a white cocktail dress that looked suspiciously bridal. She was glued to Nolan's side, beaming as he held court. I felt a sickness rising in my throat that had nothing to do with the cheap wine. When the group began to move, I did not join them. I followed at a distance. They went to a smaller, more exclusive private dining room at Maison Celeste. I wasn't on the list. I stood outside the heavy velvet curtains of the private room, peeking through a gap. The lights were dim. Nolan was standing up, making a toast. Then, he turned to Brianna. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. My breath caught in my throat. It was a diamond ring, a huge, solitaire diamond that cost more than I had earned in the last 3 years combined. He kissed her. It was not a friendly peck. It was deep, possessive, and practiced. And then, the sound that shattered me. Applause. I looked at the table. My mother and father were clapping. They were smiling. They looked proud. My father leaned over to my mother, his voice carrying clearly through the gap in the curtains. "Finally," he said. "Step aside. Sam, it is Brianna's time." I stood frozen in the hallway. I waited for the heartbreak, for the tears, for the collapse. But nothing came. Instead, I felt a sudden icy calm wash over me. In that single moment, the love I had carried for Nolan, the loyalty I had held for my family, simply died. It did not fade away. It was executed. I turned around and walked out of the restaurant without making a sound. I was not a wife anymore. I was a witness. I woke up to the sound of a shopping cart slamming into a metal corral. My neck was stiff, bent at an impossible angle against the driver's side window of my 10-year-old Corolla. The parking lot lights of the 24-hour supercenter hummed above me, casting a sickly yellow glow over my dashboard. I picked up my phone, praying my data plan had not been cut off yet. It was 3 a.m. I tapped the banking app icon. Access denied, contact administrator. Nolan had locked me out. I was his wife, but in the eyes of the bank, I was suddenly a stranger. My thumb hovered over Instagram, a masochistic impulse I could not control. There it was, at the top of the feed, a photo of a manicured hand resting on a steering wheel, a massive diamond catching the light. The caption read, "New beginnings with my soulmate." The hashtag was future Mrs. Pierce. I dropped the phone on the passenger seat. I did not cry. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a crinkled business card I had saved for 2 years. Vera Klein. She was a lawyer who had once verbally eviscerated a manager at the grocery store for screaming at me over a voided coupon. She had handed me her card then and said, "If you ever decide to stop being a doormat, call me." I dialed. It rang 4 times. "This better be a felony or a fatality." A voice rasped on the other end. "It is Samantha." "From the grocery store," I said, my voice cracking from disuse. "You gave me your card. You said to call when I was ready." There was a pause, the sound of a lighter flicking, and then a long exhale. "You are the girl with the doctor husband who looks like he practices smiling in a mirror. Did you kill him?" "No," I said, "but he took everything." "Did you sign anything?" she asked sharply. "Separation agreement. Quitclaim deed. Anything." "No." "Good," Vera said. "Bring everything to my office. Every receipt. If you threw them away, you are dead." "I have them," I whispered. "I have all of them." By 4:30 that morning, I was sitting in Vera's office. It was a chaotic space filled with stacks of files and smelled of stale coffee. I dumped the contents of my shoebox onto her mahogany conference table. 7 years of receipts. 7 years of my life reduced to thermal paper and ink. Vera and I spent the next 6 hours downloading every statement we could legally access. We built a timeline. And as the sun came up, the picture that formed was not just ugly, it was criminal. "Here," Vera said, pointing a manicured nail at the screen. "Look at this pattern." I squinted at the spreadsheet. Every month, right around the time I handed Nolan my cash earnings for his tuition payments, a transfer of the exact same amount went out to a vendor called BRN Concepts. "Who is BRN?" I asked. Vera typed furiously. "Shell Company. Registered agent is Brianna Reed." I felt the blood drain from my face. But I paid his tuition. He said he could not get loans. He lied. Vera said, pulling up a credit report. He took out the maximum federal student loans every semester. He pocketed the loans, took your cash, and funneled your money directly to your sister's company. You were not paying for school. Samantha, you were funding her lifestyle. The hits kept coming. We pulled the property records for the luxury condo downtown. My parents had told me they bought it as an investment for their retirement. The deed told a different story. The owners listed were Nolan Pierce and Brianna Reed. Look at the authorized user on the utility account for the condo, Vera said, her voice dropping lower. I looked. Marlene Reed. My mother. She was paying the electric bill for the love nest my husband shared with my sister. They knew, I said, my voice trembling. My whole family. They all knew. They did not just know. Honey, they helped, Vera said. She tossed a document across the table. But this is the one that worries me. It was a life insurance policy, a term life policy for $1 million. The insured was Samantha Reed. The beneficiary was the Reed Family Trust. I never signed this, I said, staring at the signature that looked remarkably like mine. Vera looked at me, her eyes narrowing. She reached across the table and grabbed my wrist, turning it over to look at the veins. He is an orthopedic surgeon, but he manages your health. Right, gives you supplements, just vitamins, I said. He makes me a smoothie every morning. He says I am anemic. That is why I am always so tired. Vera stood up and walked to the door. We are done with paperwork for now. I am sending you to a private lab. I want a hair follicle test and a full blood panel. Right now. I think you are not anemic, Vera said grimly. I think you are being sedated. While she printed the lab order, her computer pinged with a recovered email from the shared cloud account I still had access to on my old phone. It was an email from my father to Nolan, dated 3 years ago. I read the subject line strategy. The body of the email was short. Keep her tired. She won't fight. Just get her to the finish line, and the trust handles the rest. I dropped the phone. The glass screen cracked against the table edge. This was not an affair. This was a slow-motion execution, and I had been digging my own grave for 7 years. Vera, I said, looking up. My fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I do not want to just sue him. I want to bury him. Then wipe your eyes, Vera said. We have work to do. Vera laid out the strategy like a general planning a siege. The office was quiet, the blinds drawn tight against the afternoon sun. We have to be smart. Samantha, Vera said, leaning over her cluttered desk. If we go to the police right now with the fraud and the poisoning, the state freezes everything. The accounts, the house, the assets. You will be vindicated, but you will be broke and homeless while the investigation takes 3 years. We do this in 2 steps. What is step 1, I asked. Recovery, Vera said. We force a settlement. We make him sign over the assets to buy your silence. We let him think he is winning by paying you off. And once the ink is dry and the title is in your name, then we drop the hammer. To make this work, I had to become the version of myself they had created. I stopped washing my hair daily, letting it hang limp and dull around my face. I dug my oldest, most frayed cardigan out of the donation pile. I skipped concealer, letting the dark circles under my eyes stand out like purple bruises. I practiced hunching my shoulders in the mirror, making myself smaller, taking up less space. I had to look like a woman who had already lost. We spent hours assembling the kill kit. We called it the golden envelope. Into it went the bank statements showing the monthly transfers to BRN Concepts, the property deed with my mother's name listed on the utility bill, the shell company registration documents proving my sister was the owner, the timeline I had created matching every single dollar I earned to every dollar he stole, and the copy of the life insurance policy I had stolen from my father's safe. This is not just evidence. I told Vera as I slid the stack into the heavy yellow folder. This is a receipt for my life. Vera nodded and sent the email. It was a masterpiece of pathetic desperation. We requested mediation, stating that I was willing to walk away from the marriage quietly. My only condition was simple. I needed a place to live. He will bite, Vera predicted, tapping her pen on the desk. Narcissists always think they can buy their way out of a nuisance. He thinks you are just a pest he needs to pay an exterminator for. She was right. Nolan's lawyer responded within 2 hours. They agreed to mediation, but they had conditions. They wanted a non-disclosure agreement so strict it would prevent me from even whispering his name to a neighbor, and they hinted, subtly, that if I fought back or made a scene, Nolan would use his medical authority to have my mental stability questioned. They were threatening to have me committed. Let them think you are crazy, Vera said, her eyes hard. Let them think you are weak. That is your armor. She grabbed my shoulders, locking her eyes onto mine. Samantha, listen to me. This is the most important part. You do not say the word police. You do not say medical board. You do not threaten him. If you spook him, he shuts down. You just say one thing. I am tired, I recited, my voice dropping to a rasp. I just want it over. Perfect. Vera grinned. Then she made a call I did not expect. She put the phone on speaker. The voice on the other end was deep and clipped. It was Evan Hart, a district attorney known for eating white-collar criminals for breakfast. I cannot intervene in a civil divorce. Evan's voice crackled through the speaker. But if he lies under oath, if he commits perjury in front of a judge regarding assets or criminal intent, then he is mine. He will lie. I said to the phone. He believes his own lies. Just before we left, the courier arrived with the envelope from the toxicology lab. Vera tore it open. She scanned the page and let out a low whistle. Benzodiazepines. She read, long-term usage markers, high levels. And since you do not have a prescription, this is battery, maybe attempted murder. My hands shook, but not from fear. It was a vibration of pure rage. It is not enough to convict him today, Vera said, tucking the result into the golden envelope. But it is enough to get a protective order and to make sure he never practices medicine again once we are done. I looked at the envelope. For 7 years, I had been the puppet. I had danced when they pulled the strings. I had worked when they demanded money. I had slept when they fed me drugs. But as I picked up that yellow folder, I felt a shift in the gravity of the room. I was not the victim anymore. I was the one holding the scissors. The vibration of my phone against the center console felt less like a notification and more like a warning shot. I had barely left the parking lot of Vera's law firm when the screen lit up with the number for the warehouse distribution center. It was my shift supervisor. Rick, management needs to see you, Rick said. His voice was tight. Now. I drove straight there. When I walked into the glass-walled office overlooking the warehouse floor, the regional manager was waiting. On his desk lay a printout of a badge access log and a typed resignation letter. We found a discrepancy in inventory, the manager said, not bothering to look me in the eye. High-value electronics went missing from Cage B. Your badge swiped in at 2:30 this afternoon. I looked at the log. That is impossible. I was at a lawyer's office downtown at 2:30. I have a time-stamped parking receipt to prove it. The manager sighed, pushing the resignation letter toward me. Look, Samantha, we do not want to ruin your life. If you sign this voluntary resignation admitting to the error in judgment, we will not call the police. We will just let you go quietly. If you force us to investigate, well, a theft charge looks terrible in family court. The trap was so clumsy it was almost insulting. If I signed, I was admitting to a crime. If I was fired for theft, Nolan would use it to prove I was unfit, unstable, and desperate. Pull the security footage, I said, my voice steady. Cage B has 3 cameras. Show me the video of me taking the boxes. The manager cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. The system was down for maintenance today. Bad timing. Just bad luck. It was the same script as the grocery store. The same script as my life. The cameras always conveniently failed when I was being framed. I am not signing that, I said. I stood up and walked out. I called Vera from the car. She did not panic. She got angry. Within 20 minutes, she had drafted a litigation hold letter. She emailed the corporate legal department, accusing them of constructive dismissal and defamation, and demanded the preservation of all digital logs, including the supposed maintenance records for the camera system. By the time I got back to my car, the manager had emailed me stating that my termination was pending review rather than immediate for cause. They were scared, but I was out of a job. Then came the digital assault. My phone chimed with a text from Nolan. I heard about work. This erratic behavior is exactly why I am worried about you. I can speak to a colleague in psychiatry. We can have you evaluated. I can make the call for a 72-hour hold if you are a danger to yourself. He was using his medical license as a weapon. He was threatening to have me committed to a psych ward to keep me from the courtroom. I did not reply. I took a screenshot. Minutes later, a notification from Facebook popped up. Brianna. She had posted a long, tearful status update. It is so hard when people you love let greed turn them into monsters. She wrote, Please pray for my sister. She is so jealous of my happiness that she is trying to destroy our family. We just want her to get the help she needs. Below the post, my cousins and aunts were commenting with praying hands emojis and messages about how toxic I had become. My mother had simply commented, Stay strong. Brianna, the truth always wins. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reply and post the bank statements right there in the comments. But I remembered Vera's rule. Let them talk. I took screenshots of every comment, every lie, every timestamp. I tried to log into my email to forward the screenshots to Vera, but my password was rejected. Incorrect password. A notification flashed on my screen. Login attempted from a device in Dallas, Texas. They are trying to scrub the emails. Vera told me when I called her on her secure line. Change everything. Use a passphrase, not a password. 2-factor authentication on everything. And log the attempt. It shows intent to destroy evidence. I felt hunted. I drove to a different grocery store parking lot, too afraid to go to the motel where I was staying. As I walked back to my car after buying a bottle of water, I stopped cold. Sitting on the hood of my rusted Corolla was a small cardboard box. It was a priority mail package, but the label had been handwritten. Inside, nested in tissue paper, was a familiar plastic bottle, premium women's multivitamin. There was a sticky note attached to the bottle in handwriting I recognized as Nolan's. You forgot these. You look pale. Take care of yourself. He had found my car. He knew where I was. I reached for the bottle, my hand trembling, but Vera's voice echoed in my head. Do not touch it. I used a napkin to pick up the box by the edges. I placed it in the trunk, sealing it inside a plastic grocery bag. This was not a gift. It was a threat. And if the lab tested those pills and found the same sedatives that were in my blood, it was a felony. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. I had lost my job. My family was destroying my name on the internet. My husband was stalking me. But as I looked at the evidence pile growing on the passenger seat, I realized something. They were throwing everything at me because they were terrified. They were not acting like winners anymore. They were acting like criminals trying to cover their tracks. The mediation took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor, a setting designed to make you feel small. Nolan sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking every inch the aggrieved party. Brianna sat to his right, wearing a crisp white blazer that looked disturbingly bridal. She had her hand resting possessively on his forearm. Behind them, my parents, Glenn and Marlene, sat with their arms crossed, shaking their heads at me as if I were a rebellious teenager rather than a 32-year-old woman fighting for her life. Nolan's lawyer slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "Here is the offer," the lawyer said, his voice bored. $10,000 in cash. You keep the Corolla, and you sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that bars you from discussing Mr. Pierce, his medical practice, or his finances with anyone, ever. I looked at the paper. $10,000. That was the price they had put on 7 years of slavery. I hunched my shoulders, letting my hair fall forward to hide my face. I made sure my hands trembled visibly as I reached for the water glass. I stammered, pitching my voice low and raspy. "I do not have anywhere to go. The car, it needs repairs." Nolan laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "Sam, be realistic. You cannot afford an apartment in this city. Take the money and move back to the suburbs. Maybe find a room to rent." "She needs a home." "Nolan," Vera said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were razor sharp. "We will sign your NDA. We will walk away today. But we want the condo on Bayview Rise." The room exploded. "No!" Brianna shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. "That is our investment. That is where we are going to." She cut herself off, realizing she was about to admit they were moving in together before the divorce was even final. "Samantha, really?" my mother hissed, leaning forward. "Do not be so greedy. That apartment is worth $500,000. You cannot even pay the utility bill." "It is a fair trade for her silence," Vera said, cutting through the noise. She looked directly at Nolan. "We know about the student loans." "Nolan, we know about the cash withdrawals. If you give her the condo, she assumes the mortgage debt, and we agree not to audit the loan history. We close the book on the financials." Today, I watched Nolan's face. I saw the gears turning. He was terrified of the fraud being exposed. He did not know about the shell company evidence or the toxicology reports yet. He just thought I was threatening to expose his student loan scheme. In his mind, giving me a condo with a high mortgage was a win for him. He thought he was saddling me with debt I would drown in, while he walked away clean with his medical license intact. He whispered something to his lawyer, then turned to Brianna and silenced her with a sharp look. "Fine," Nolan said, leaning back in his chair with a smug smile. "She can have the condo, and the debt that comes with it, but she signs the NDA right now. If she breathes a word about my finances to a soul, I sue her for everything she has ever touched." "Deal," Vera said. The paperwork was drafted in minutes. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. I was shaking from the effort of holding back a scream of victory. I signed my name on the deed transfer. Then, I signed the NDA. I watched Nolan sign. He scribbled his name with a flourish, arrogant to the end. He did not realize what he had just done. By forcing me to sign an NDA to cover up financial crimes, he had just created a document that proved coercion. The NDA was not a shield, it was a confession signed in black ink. Vera slid the papers into her briefcase. The meeting was over. Nolan stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked past my chair, pausing to lean down close to my ear. "Merry Christmas early." "Sam," he whispered, his hot breath against my neck making my skin crawl. "Enjoy the view. The property taxes alone will crush you in 6 months. I give you a year before you are on the street." I did not look at him. I did not tell him that I had already lined up a forensic accountant. I did not tell him that the debt he thought would crush me was the evidence that would send him to prison. "Goodbye, Nolan," I whispered, staring at the table. He chuckled and walked out, Brianna and my parents trailing behind him like a royal procession. They thought they had just thrown out the trash. They had no idea I had just pocketed the only thing I needed to burn their kingdom to the ground. His signature. "You understand what we just did, right?" Vera asked, pacing the length of her office. The neon sign of the bail bondsman across the street cast a red glow over her face. "I signed away my rights," I said, studying the copy of the non-disclosure agreement. "No," Vera corrected, stopping to point a finger at the paper. You signed a confession. A contract that exists solely to conceal illegal activity fraud. Coercion. Battery is not a contract. It is evidence. But we cannot just wave it around yet. We have to wait for the moment the judge asks him why he needed it. She tapped her phone. I just got off the line with Evan Hart. He is the prosecutor for the district. He agreed to sit in the back row of the courtroom tomorrow. If Nolan or your family lie under oath while Evan is watching, well, perjury turns a civil case into a criminal booking in about 10 minutes. My phone buzzed. It was the final report from the independent toxicologist. I opened the file, and the text blurred for a second before snapping into focus. Chronic exposure to benzodiazepines and barbiturates consistent with non-therapeutic sedation. Vera looked over my shoulder. There it is. He was not just keeping you tired. Sam, he was keeping you pliable. He was drugging you so you wouldn't notice he was robbing you blind. But the next document Vera pulled from her printer hurt worse than the poison. It was a financial background check on my father. Glenn. I stared at the numbers. My father did not just have a mortgage. He had gambling debts. Massive ones. There were liens against his pension and high-interest loans from lenders who did not operate through banks. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They did not push me aside because they loved Brianna more. They did it because Nolan was their golden ticket out of debt. I was just the collateral damage they had to sell to keep my father's knees intact. You have to go back there, Vera said gently. My source says the original insurance policy is still in your father's wall safe. A copy is good, but the original with the wet signature, that is the nail in the coffin. I received a text from my mother an hour later. Come get your boxes. We are clearing out the room for Brianna's office. Tonight or it goes in the trash. It was a trap. They wanted to rattle me before court, but I drove to the house I grew up in. My stomach twisted in knots. The house was quiet. My mother pointed to a pile of cardboard boxes in the hallway without looking up from her television. Be quick, she said. Nolan is coming over for dinner. I hauled 2 boxes to my car to make noise, then slipped off my shoes. I crept down the hallway to my father's study. The door was ajar. I went straight to the painting of the sailboat that hid the wall safe. I stared at the keypad. My father changed his passwords constantly, usually based on things he loved. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried his anniversary. Nothing. Then, with a bitter taste in my mouth, I typed in the digits for August 22nd, Brianna's birthday. The light turned green. Click. I reached into the dark metal box, bypassed the cash, bypassed the deeds. There it was. The thick binder for the Reed Family Trust. I flipped to the back. My life insurance policy. $1 million. Signed by me, a forgery that looked terrifyingly real and witnessed by Glenn Reed. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page, every amendment, every beneficiary designation. Shopping a voice sneered from the doorway. I spun around. Brianna was leaning against the doorframe, holding a bridal magazine. She did not look at the open safe. She was too busy looking at herself in the mirror on the opposite wall. Just getting what is mine, I said, closing the safe door with my hip. Brianna laughed and tossed the magazine onto the desk. It landed open on a page of lace gowns. We picked the date. By the way, as soon as you sign the divorce decree tomorrow, I am changing my name. It will be nice to have a Mrs. Pierce in the family who actually knows how to keep a man happy. Make sure you read the fine print. Brianna, I said, walking past her, Nolan has a lot of hidden costs. I grabbed the last box and walked out the front door. I was halfway to my car when a black Mercedes SUV pulled into the driveway, blocking me in. Nolan stepped out. He looked immaculate in his scrubs, the picture of a hero doctor coming home. He walked up to me, invading my space until I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the antiseptic scent of the hospital. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper that didn't carry to the street. You are making a mistake fighting this. Sam, he hissed. I know people. I can make you disappear. I can erase you. And no one will even ask where you went because they already think you are crazy. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my feet stayed planted on the concrete. I shifted my gaze over his shoulder to the small, blinking blue light next to the front door. You just said that, I said, my voice steady and loud, directly into the Ring doorbell camera. Nolan froze. He whipped his head around to look at the camera, then back at me. His face contorted in a flash of pure, unfiltered panic. Move your car. Nolan, I said. Or I send the footage to the medical board tonight. He backed away, his hands held up in a mock surrender, but his eyes were murderous. As I drove away, I did not look back at the house. I touched the phone in my pocket. I had the toxicology report. I had the financial records. I had the photos of the insurance fraud. And now, I had a threat recorded on video. The puzzle was finished. Tomorrow. I wasn't just going to court. I was going to war. The courtroom was unusually crowded for a Tuesday morning. It felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a spectator sport. Nolan sat at the defendant's table, looking every inch the benevolent victor. He adjusted his silk tie and whispered something to his lawyer that made them both chuckle. In the front row, Brianna sat with her legs crossed, staring at me with a look of pity that barely concealed her triumph. Her eyes said, "You are about to disappear." Behind her, my parents sat stiffly, refusing to make eye contact with me. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Marlowe who had seen every variety of divorce lie, peered over her glasses. "Counsel," Judge Marlowe said, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "I understand there is a settlement agreement on the table. We are here to finalize the dissolution." Nolan's lawyer stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with an air of smooth confidence. "Yes, Your Honor. My client has been incredibly generous. Despite Ms. Reed's erratic behavior and lack of contribution to the marital assets, Dr. Pierce has agreed to transfer a property to her name. We just want to ensure she has a safe place to land." She signed the agreement voluntarily. "Voluntarily," Judge Marlowe repeated, looking at me. "Ms. Reed, do you agree?" Vera stood up before I could speak. "Your Honor, we would like to clarify the nature of the assets before finalization. We believe the agreement was signed under duress to conceal financial misappropriation." Nolan's lawyer practically jumped out of his chair. "Objection, Ms. Reed signed a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement yesterday. She is barred from discussing my client's finances. This is exactly the kind of paranoid harassment the NDA was designed to prevent." Vera did not flinch. She simply picked up the signed NDA and walked it to the bench. "We are submitting the NDA as Evidence Exhibit A, Your Honor. A contract that exchanges high-value real estate for silence regarding a husband's financial history is not a divorce settlement. It is a bribe." Judge Marlowe took the document. She read it silently, her eyebrows knitting together. "This clause. It explicitly forbids reporting of loans or medical practices. This reads like hush money. Counselor." Nolan leaned forward, unable to help himself. "It is protection, Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Samantha has been unwell. She invents stories. I have a reputation to protect. Then you will not mind answering a few questions under oath to clear the air," Judge Marlowe said. It was not a request. Nolan took the stand. He looked bored, as if this were a waste of his valuable time. "Dr. Pierce," Vera asked, "did you use marital funds to purchase the condo on Bayview Rise?" Nolan said firmly, "That was purchased with a private loan. And the life insurance policy on your wife for $1 million, did you take that out without her knowledge?" "That was a clerical error by the broker." Nolan lied, not blinking. "I corrected it as soon as I found out. There was no intent to profit. And the pills you gave her daily, the ones she thought were vitamins, they were vitamins," Nolan said, smiling at the judge. "She is anemic." I was taking care of her. The judge turned her gaze to the gallery. And Mr. and Mrs. Reed, did you collude with Dr. Pierce to set up a trust that would collect this insurance money? My father stood up, clutching his hat. Absolutely not, Your Honor. We love our daughter. Brianna chimed in from her seat, her voice shrill. She is just jealous because Nolan chose me. She is making all of this up. The room fell silent. Nolan looked at me and winked. He thought he had won. He thought his word against mine was enough. Vera turned to me and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Now. I stood up. I did not feel small anymore. I picked up the thick yellow envelope from the table. It felt heavy, like a brick of gold. I walked to the bench, my steps echoing on the wood floor. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady and cold. They just swore on a Bible that these things did not happen. I would like to submit the truth. I placed the envelope on the bench. Inside, I said, looking directly at Nolan, you will find the bank transfer timeline matching my cash withdrawals to the shell company owned by my sister. You will find the toxicology report from an independent lab confirming high levels of sedatives in my blood. And you will find photographs of the original life insurance policy, taken yesterday. Inside my father's safe. Judge Marlowe opened the envelope. She pulled out the toxicology report. She looked at the red ink. Then she pulled out the photos of the insurance policy with my father's signature as a witness. She looked up at Nolan. He was not smiling anymore. His face had gone the color of old ash. Judge Marlowe looked at the papers, then back at Nolan. Then, she let out a sound that froze the blood in everyone's veins. She laughed. Dr. Pierce, the judge said, holding up the photograph of the insurance policy. You just swore under oath that this document did not exist. It is truly fascinating. That you would perjure yourself so completely when the ink on your own signature is barely dry. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a disaster. Judge Marlowe held up a single sheet of paper from the yellow envelope, her hand trembling slightly with suppressed rage. She adjusted her glasses and read aloud, her voice ringing off the mahogany walls. This is an email from Dr. Pierce to Mr. Glenn Reed, dated 6 months ago. The judge announced, it reads, stop asking for the payout. We have to wait until the 2-year contestability period on the insurance policy expires. If she dies before then, the insurance company investigates. Wait 3 more months. Then we let nature take its course. The air left the room. My mother gasped, a sound that seemed too loud in the dead quiet. Nolan froze. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by the terrified look of a man watching a train barrel toward him. Nolan's lawyer scrambled to his feet, knocking over his water pitcher. Objection. There is no foundation for this. This is inadmissible hearsay. We cannot verify the source of that printout. Vera was ready. She walked to the bench and placed a USB drive next to the envelope. We have included the digital chain of custody. Your Honor, the metadata confirms the email originated from the defendant's secure hospital server. It is verified. Before the lawyer could sputter another excuse, a deep voice boomed from the back of the room. Your Honor, if I may. Evan Hart stood up. He walked past the wooden railing, flashing his badge. I am Evan Hart, District Attorney for the Fraud Division. I have been sitting here listening to the defendants lie under oath for the last hour. I am formally requesting that the record reflect immediate counts of perjury against Nolan Pierce, Brianna Reed, and Glenn Reed. Judge Marlowe slammed her gavel down. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Order. This court is now freezing all proceedings regarding the dissolution of marriage. This is no longer a civil dispute. This is a crime scene. She pointed a finger at the bailiffs standing by the doors. Secure the exits. No one leaves. 2 detectives in plain clothes stepped out from the gallery, moving down the center aisle. Evan Hart began reading from a notepad as they walked. "We have probable cause for arrest on multiple counts," Evans said, his voice calm and lethal. "Bank fraud, forgery of a financial instrument, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, and based on the toxicology report submitted today, attempted battery with a controlled substance." Brianna panicked. She jumped up, her chair clattering backward, and tried to bolt toward the side door. A bailiff blocked her path before she made it 3 steps. She began to sob, a high-pitched, ugly sound. My mother, Marlene, lunged toward the railing as the detectives moved toward Brianna. "No, do not touch her. That is my child. You cannot take my child." I turned to look at my mother. For the first time in my life, I did not see a parent. I saw a stranger who had sold me to save her lifestyle. "Your child is standing right here," I said. My voice was cold, cutting through her screams. "But you never saw me. Did you?" Nolan was backing away from the detective reaching for him. He held up his hands, his face red. "I am a doctor. I have patients. You cannot do this to me. I have surgery scheduled for tomorrow. You just turned my courtroom into a mockery. Dr. Pierce," Judge Marlowe shouted, her judicial composure finally snapping, "and you do not have the right to give orders to anyone ever again." While the officers secured them, the judge turned back to Vera. She signed a document with a furious scratch of her pen. "I am issuing an immediate temporary restraining order and an emergency freeze on all assets," Judge Marlowe stated. "Control of the marital estate and the contested condo is transferred to Ms. Reed immediately to prevent dissipation. The non-disclosure agreement is hereby voided as an instrument of coercion used to conceal criminal activity." The click of handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. I watched as they pulled Nolan's hands behind his back. The expensive suit bunched up around his shoulders. He looked small. He looked pathetic, as the officer led him past me. Nolan stopped. He looked at me with wild, desperate eyes, waiting for me to say something, to offer him a deal, to save him one last time. I leaned in close. I wanted him to hear me. I wanted this to be the last thing he remembered before the cell door closed. "You laughed," I whispered, my voice steady and dry. "You laughed because you thought I had no lawyer, but you forgot something. Nolan." I had the truth. I watched them drag him out the double doors. I picked up my empty tote bag and walked out of the courtroom into the bright, blinding sunlight of the afternoon. I was broke. I was tired. But for the first time in 7 years, I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Samantha's revenge. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.